Okay, here we have Under the Wave of Kanagawa, also known as the Great Wave. This is from a series of woodblock prints it's called the 36 Views of Mount Fuji, and the artist is Hokusai, Hokusai. It dates from about 1830 to 1833 CE. Now this is a polychrome woodblock print and ink and color on paper. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the polychrome woodblock print in a second. But in regards to this piece right here, this is just one image. It's the last from the series of the 36 views of Mount Fuji. And it has become one of the most famous works of art in the world. It is probably the most iconic work of Japanese art. Initially, thousands of copies of this print were quickly produced and sold very cheaply. And this whole series was created by Hokusai when he was elderly and in debt as a way to make money. And he made a lot of money off of these prints, despite the fact that they were very cheap to buy. In fact, if you were to buy these in the time period it was produced, it would have been the cost of a large bowl of noodles, is one of the sources I read said. So during this time period, Japanese trade was heavily restricted. This is a little bit before the period of the opening of Japan from Matthew Perry. However, this print does display the influence of Dutch art because the Japanese and the Dutch did trade. And it's going to prove to be very inspirational for many artists working in Europe later in the 19th century. And I'll get back to that too. So this is multicolored woodblock on paper that is 10 by 14 inches. All the images in the series will depict a scene with Mount Fuji, but it doesn't necessarily mean that Mount Fuji is the focal point, and Mount Fuji is right there in the background. Mount Fuji is a very important mountain for the Japanese, and so because of its significance, we all see it in every image from this Hokusai print series. The mountain here almost seems part of the massive cresting waves that look like they're about to destroy 3 fishing boats below. The mountain is made tiny by the use of perspective, and it also can seem like the wave may destroy it, but because of the perspective, we see that it is in the background. The technique of this piece is ukiyo-e, Ukiyo-e, or floating world, and it refers to the impermanence of the world that is prominent in Japanese pieces. This series is significant because it's a landscape theme, and that will be becoming very popular for Japanese prints. So ukiyo-e is the name for the Japanese woodblock prints made during the Edo period. Ukiyo, which originated as a Buddhist term, means floating world. As I said before, refers to this impermanence of the world. The earliest prints were made in black and white because it's easier to do that. But the Hokusai's work will add additional colors. But to add an additional color, a separate block of wood is going to be used for each color. Each print is made with a fine overlay of black line, which helps to break up the flat colors. Ukiyo-e prints are recognizable for their emphasis on line and pure bright color, as well as their ability to distill form down to the minimum. Let me show you on this slide of how a woodblock technique would work. So you would be carving away the areas of the negative space, and then this would be where the ink would go on, just like it would a stamp. So then first you would they would create this piece. And then to add color, they would add just this part of a wood block that would go on top of the clothing here for this person. So you could see the clothing is right here. And then here you could see where the trees are filled in, and it looks like birds are also filled in here. And then you would put that on top of this first piece. And then to give it a little bit of shadow, you would add in this color. And then we can see the progression of color as each block is going to be then set on top of it. It's a very exacting process. You have to be very exact with the carving. And so this truly was, a very difficult technique to master. But the use of the black lines and then the color really gives this depth and space. Okay, going back to this picture. So if you can imagine how many different colors that they would need to start off with, obviously you would need the black, you would need the white, the blue for the waves, the brown, different colors of the brown for the boats and for the people. What we do see with this piece in regards to it being significant internationally is the fact that the use of blue. The blue color that we see here is called a Prussian blue. Prussia is a European area, which is now kind of more in northern Germany. And this color, this Prussian blue, would have been traded by the Dutch to the Japanese, and then they are going to include it in their pieces. Okay, so getting back a little bit to context, beginning in the 1640s, as I mentioned before, Japan limits its trade with the exception of China and the Dutch. That changes after 1850 when the United States demands the trade relations be opening. And after this date, there becomes a flood of interest in Japanese art in Europe and influenced many European artists. In the 1860s, 70s, and 90s, we're going to see this idea of floating world or ukiyo, or this idea of the flat space. All of that is going to have a particular interest to the Impressionists and the Post-Impressionists. And I will, when we get to that period, I'll show you examples of that. Another thing that's interesting is that this is a depiction of an everyday life scene. There's odd angles, so it's kind of cut off. It doesn't show the whole event. It's not a narrative. This is just a moment in time. It's capturing a moment in time. The woodblock technique, first they had to draw it on this, what's called washi or Japanese paper, glue face down onto wood. They would use a cherry tree wood because it was easier to carve to do the base for the drawing the outlines. Then a small wooden object would, it was called a baron, was used to press the paper to the wood block to apply the ink to the paper. Creating wood blocks were very time consuming, but once they were created, it allowed for this mass production of prints that become very profitable for the artist and affordable for the consumer. For multicolor prints like this series, several separate wood blocks had to be created and aligned perfectly with the rest of the composition for the multicolored image. We can see that there's a demand for having these landscape pieces for the rising middle class for Japanese and the elite class of the Japanese, because they wanted to have these prints in their homes. The artist Hokusai tried to focus on the daily life of the Japanese people from a variety of several social levels. And let me go to show you the other pieces that are part of the Mount Fuji series by Hokusai. We can see this is just different, a day in the life of someone here in their home. You can see the trees, but again, you have the Mount Fuji in the background. Definitely a landscape part right here, but you can see peasants are walking up a hill going somewhere. So these are just scenes of everyday life that Hokusai was trying to capture with his 36 views of Mount Fuji. This is the one that is on my ceiling, and that one of my students did last year. So it's truly an iconic piece. You guys know Quicksilver. The logo for Quicksilver got its inspiration from Under the Wave of Kanagawa. In regards to themes, well, it could be landscape, but it could also be about the power of nature. This could be seen as a tsunami that's about to crash over the men that are fishing. It could also be seen as a way of saying that